Ena mana e reo rangatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Nā mihi ki tēnei hui, ki tēnei zui, ko David Downs toko ingoa. Good morning, everybody. My name is David. I am the CEO of the New Zealand Story Group, and welcome to this Market Pulse webinar. It's very good to see so many of you joining via whatever channel you're on at the moment, whether that's on our LinkedIn feed or YouTube or any other mechanism, or if you're watching this later, you're very welcome. This morning, we're going to be taking you through the really interesting results of our Market Pulse survey that has been happening over the last few months. But before we go into that, I'll just kind of orient you in terms of what we're up to this morning. First of all, I'm going to be joined shortly by some other people on the call. So we have Lucy Alborn, who is New Zealand Story's market research expert, who will frame up this piece of research. It's a little bit different than types of research we've done in the past. And we've taken a bit of a different approach, a bit more of a clinical approach, trying to understand some specific things that might be very actionable for people. So Lucy will take you through a little bit of that. And then Josh and Kim from our research partners 555 will join us to really get into the meat of the research itself. And they'll be going through all the various parts of it. There's lots of interesting reflections from people who live internationally on their own situations, their own countries, on how they think about New Zealand, and particularly how they're interested in particular aspects of New Zealand. But I won't give away too much. Suffice it to say, as I said earlier, there's some really interesting results that have come through. As mentioned, we've taken a bit of a different approach to it this year to really understand insights that we could action from this research. So really good to have 555 as part of our research partnership. They're really building an amazing presentation for us as well. So before I get into that, here's the agenda for today. As I mentioned, we're going to give a little bit of an overview of the New Zealand Story Group for those of you who have not heard of us or of the work that we do at New Zealand Story. I'll give you a little bit of an update on that. As mentioned, a research background. Research never exists in isolation. It's part of an ongoing discovery, if you like, of what the world thinks about New Zealand and how we might do something about that. Then we'll get those insights. That'll be the bulk of the presentation, is those insights. It'll be about 45 or 50 minutes. There is time for Q&A, and the important bit about a Q&A in a webinar like this is I'd ask you not to leave your questions until the very end, because then we'll run out of time. Put your questions in the chat or in the comments of whatever platform you're using as you think of the questions. And then when we get to the end, to Q&A, I'll facilitate that part. We'll have a bank of questions already ready to go, so we're not sitting waiting for people typing. The way you can ask questions, as mentioned, is whatever platform you're watching on at the moment, LinkedIn or YouTube, you can write a comment, and a comment will then show up at our end as well, and we'll put these comments up. I'll give you a bit of a demonstration. There's a comment coming through, and we'll be able to show them on screen and then answer those questions or comments as they come through. So, for example, Anna-Laura asked, will this be saved? Yes, it will. It'll be available later on our website at New Zealand Story. So please feel free to put those comments in at any point that you would like. As I say, it's really helpful as you think of them to type them in, and then we'll capture them at the end. So that's the agenda for today. So let me tell you a little bit more about New Zealand Story. As mentioned, my role is part of the team at New Zealand Story. We are essentially a joint venture, a government-led joint venture of different government agencies who are working together to tell the story of New Zealand to the world. So you can see the agencies there at the bottom, everything from foreign affairs to tourism, education, trade, MB, etc. There's 7 agencies who have come together with the idea that we need, as New Zealand, to really collaborate on telling our story to the world. And telling our story means presenting ourselves as a cohesive brand, as a modern, interesting, innovative country, building on the history that we've had in the past and our core culture, our Māori culture, our English culture, and also looking at things that people might not know about us. So people know that we're a beautiful place. They know that we've got great people here, but do they know, for example, that we've got great science, technology, culture, sports, arts, etc. And those aspects, as you'll hear later this morning, are really important to help grow the already strong brand of New Zealand into something even bigger. So there we go, New Zealand Story, a joint venture, if you like, of government agencies working within the government system. We work very closely with businesses and organisations, with education operators, tourism operators, etc. And basically, we empower all those organisations to tell their story. So New Zealand, that whole idea that New Zealand has a story is actually hard to get your head around. Of course, there are millions of stories of New Zealand. All of you have a story. All of the companies that you work in or with have stories. When we talk about the New Zealand story, we're talking about the core brand and the values of New Zealand and the attributes that we think are really important, that the rest of the world loves to hear about us and they're curious about and they want to know more about. And we define those and we help others tell that story and tell their stories consistent with that brand attribute of New Zealand. Our theory is the more that the world knows about us, the greater our chances to build our reputation. And with reputation comes value, as I'll show you in a second. So New Zealand Story has a series of services that we offer. So to make it really tangible for people, we have the research that you're about to see is a really good example of the types of service that we offer. We do this kind of research quite regularly. On our website, you'll find lots of historical documents, global pulses like the one we're about to show you now, in multiple countries at once. We also have surveys that drill in on specific markets and specific areas, sectors sometimes. So that's the first thing. Content, we develop and create content, videos and graphics, like the little thing you saw at the beginning, things about did you know about New Zealand? And we make those available for others, for media, for social media, for other companies to use so that they can easily tell the story of New Zealand themselves. We have a toolkit of a library of assets, videos, photography, infographics, all that sort of thing. You'll go to our website, you can find a very big toolkit. It's open source, if you like, different licensing, but you can usually download this and use it for free in your international work that you're trying to do. So it's basically trying to lower the cost for all of you in your international branding. The fourth thing there, a consultancy. That's where we work with companies or sectors more commonly to help that sector tell their story. So today we're going to be talking a lot about technology. In the technology sector, we've been working with the tech sector around a thing called See Tomorrow First. That's a campaign around New Zealand's tech sector and how we want to show up to the world. That's a good example of the consultancy that we do. And then last but certainly not least, New Zealand Story manages the trademark silver fern, the fern mark for New Zealand. And that's a really valuable asset for New Zealand. It's by far the best known symbol for the country. We manage that. We license it out to companies to use. Other government agencies, etc., use that silver fern as part of their international branding to associate themselves with New Zealand. So there you go. That's the tool set that we have here at New Zealand Story. Now, this whole concept of branding a country is really interesting. It's something we don't necessarily see that much of in New Zealand because other countries aren't necessarily doing it here to us. But if you go into other parts of the world, you'll definitely see countries positioning themselves and branding themselves and trying to showcase the best of who they are. And that's essentially what we do at New Zealand Story. We really are going out there thinking about what is the international story and brand of New Zealand and how do we want to show up in different international markets. And does it matter? Well, as you can see there, yes, absolutely it matters. We know that the stronger your country brand and narrative, the higher the odds are or the connection with buying from that country, attracting foreign investment, tourism or talent, making our products and services more valuable. One study shows that it's about a 25% premium to be from a country like New Zealand that has a very strong reputation. And of course, it also strengthens our diplomatic relationships. So the stronger our brand, the more we are respected in the world and admired and all those sorts of things. It's not just to make ourselves feel good, it's because it actually has a tangible financial impact for New Zealand. In fact, so tangible that New Zealand's brand is estimated to be worth about $280 billion US. This is as of about a year ago. Now that's right up there with the brand values of huge corporates like Microsoft or Apple or Amazon. So the brand value of New Zealand is one of the country's most important assets. So we look after that as New Zealand Story. We make sure that we are growing it all the time, but also importantly, we make sure that you can leverage that brand value. It creates a halo effect that businesses and others can use in their international work. So that's what we do at New Zealand Story. Now, I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to bring my colleague Lucy into the program. Lucy, good morning. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, David. Thank you very much.
Now, as mentioned, I said earlier, you are our absolute expert on this, and Lucy's done a wonderful job in the last year or so is helping us rethink of how our research works in a much more strategic way. So I'm going to hand over to Lucy and let her explain.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, last year, New Zealand Story implemented more structure around our Insights program. We did this so that we could design a program that would inform and support our decision-making process in managing our nation's brand. The first stage was to understand perceptions of our nation through the Brand Finance Global Soft Power Index. That's a mouthful. This is research that's quantitative in nature, and it's done in over 100 markets and has a sample size of 150,000 consumers. So this research provides a robust understanding of what the New Zealand nation brand stands for and what our strengths and weaknesses are perceived to be. In short, it kind of provides us with a measure of our nation brand equity relative to other nations. We undertook analysis of this data to reveal what we needed to do to improve New Zealand's reputation and influence in our key markets of Australia, China, the UK, the USA, and Singapore. And we plan to undertake this quant analysis on an annual basis as this becomes our key measure to track performance in changing perceptions and strengthening our brand. From this quant research, we know what we need to work on. The next stage of research was designed to understand why people hold the perceptions they do and what's needed to change these perceptions. This is the Market Pulse research, which is what we're sharing today. This research provides insights into how we might create more impactful, relevant, and focused content in order to develop New Zealand's nation brand story. And in 2024, as David mentioned, we're also planning a few deep dives into key markets such as the US and China to understand perceptions of New Zealand across sectors such as food and beverage, education, and manufacturing as examples. This is further qualitative research, which will talk to both consumers as well as some business people. We plan to be in field sort of March, April, and we'll also share this research with you later in the year. And the last box on this slide is to basically indicate that we're at the early stages of setting up ongoing social and media monitoring, enabling us to measure what stories get reach and engagement. This will help us to know what success looks like in driving conversations, thereby influencing perceptions through various media channels. We use the insights from the Global Soft Power Index research to inform our New Zealand Story strategy. Last year, we agreed with our board that we would focus on increasing our influence in key markets to achieve the biggest impact, which in turn supports economic outcomes for New Zealand. We have shared and aligned on this approach across New Zealand Inc. agencies, acknowledging that we all need to play a role in increasing New Zealand's reputation and influence. We agreed that the core focus for New Zealand Story must be on developing stories which ladder up to stronger perceptions in the arena of education and science, underpinned by our sustainability credentials and connected to our culture, thereby demonstrating our sweet spot that we innovate because we care. We refer to this as our ingenuity story. We know that we can leverage our strong perceptions on having a sustainable future, and other agencies will continue to maintain perceived strengths in education, tourism, business, and trade. We also recognise that food, as well as art and entertainment, are relatively important, but given limited resources, we needed to make choices. And given this, our focus is on telling the ingenuity story. So we'll create an integrated marketing and communications plan focused on tech, innovation, science, space, and creativity stories that deliver positive sustainability outcomes, reinforcing our nation's brand proposition. Care for people and connection to place drives our ingenuity. And now over to Josh and Kim from 55.5 to share the insights from the Market Pulse 2023 research.
Thank you, Lucy. Morning, everyone. I'm Josh. Thanks for the introduction there, guys. I'm going to give a little bit of context up front as to the research that we've undertaken, just so you understand exactly what we've done. We've done some qualitative research. So unlike the Home Power, we're talking to 150,000 people. We've had kind of fewer, deeper, richer conversations with people. But I'll just give a little bit more background there, and I'll show what we're going to take you through over the next 50 minutes or so. So a little bit of, I suppose, an overview of what we'll cover. So we've got our project background, which I will take you through in a moment. And then I'll hand over to my colleague, Kim. She's going to talk to you about that moment in time snapshot of home nation sentiments for these key markets. So giving you a sense of how people are feeling in each of those markets today as a backdrop to the work that we're doing, that New Zealand Story are doing, and I'm sure many of you are doing in these markets also. And then Kim's going to talk about understanding leadership and some conversations we've had about how national leadership in this context and the arenas we're exploring here, science and so on, how they show up, how they're perceived by people in those nations, and obviously consequently how we can affect that for New Zealand and our brand story. Then I'll jump back in and I will talk about what the impact is on New Zealand, how we're perceived, what our standing is in regard to these sectors, and what it means for us to tell impactful stories, to lift that brand story. So just a little bit of background. I think we've probably alluded to much of this, but I suppose there were two key objectives going into this research. One is to understand that year-on-year sentiment as to brand home nation sentiment and how people are feeling about their home nation today, their standing in the world, their sense of leadership in key arenas, as important context as to how they view New Zealand, which is really the focus of the second half. So it's understanding how leadership is perceived and understood at a national level, and what is the why behind that? What are the drivers of those perceptions? Where are the pieces of evidence that people are seeing that drive those perceptions? And we had some guardrails. There were some areas of focus. We didn't speak about every single component that informs that. We were focused on a few arenas. One is science, being a leader in technology and innovation, the space industry and space exploration, and also sustainability as well. So those are the areas of focus that we discussed. And in doing so, in the conversations, we used a raft of stimulus to facilitate those conversations and provoke thoughts and conversations. There were a raft of global and New Zealand brand innovations and businesses. We're not going to show those and reference those today, but I will talk about the response to some of those a little bit later on. Lastly, then, before I hand over, is just the kind of technical details, I suppose, about the work. So we conducted this work in 5 markets: Australia, UK, USA, China, and Singapore. We're about to do the same in India as well, although that's not included in the presentation today. We had 2-hour discussion groups with around 6 or 7 respondents in each. We had 3 of those groups in each market, with the exception of China, where we had an additional 1, and only 2 in Singapore. Now, the people we spoke with, we recruited them to be all familiar with New Zealand to some degree, not to have visited, but to have some perceptions in their mind as to, some sense that they have a view as to what New Zealand is all about, what we are as a country, or what we perhaps offer, so that they could offer an informed opinion on that. They were all people who had travelled overseas, so they can experience, they understand that the world is not the same everywhere. And also they had to demonstrate some interest in some of these topic areas without being experts in them. So either professionally or personally, we didn't want people who would skew the conversations, but we had people who indicated they did have interest in global affairs and the topics that we were exploring: science, technology, sustainability, and so on. So that's the background of the research, what we've done. I'll hand over to Kim now. If you guys have got questions, as David said earlier, pop them in the chat there, and we can keep an eye on them as we go, and we can kind of bring them back and answer them as many as we can, hopefully, by the end of the session. I'll hand over to Kim.
Thanks, Josh. Kia ora koutou, everyone, and a big thank you to the New Zealand Story team for having us here today. So I'm going to start us off, firstly, as Josh mentioned, by taking us through a bit of a snapshot for the key countries that we spoke with around how they're feeling about their own nation at this point in time. And it's probably just worth noting that this research was conducted at the back end of 2023. So we're quickly going through 2024, sort of already in February, but it's just a good orientation for when the research actually took place, to just remember that these perceptions are as of the end of 2023. So we will start today by looking at the US and how they see themselves. So we'll have sort of 4 key buckets for each country of where they're at. So you'll see sort of this format come through in the next few slides. So in terms of the US, the first and foremost thing is that America still sees itself as a highly influential nation, particularly as a result of the sort of involvement in military action around the world over the course of sort of 2022 and 2023. So that's definitely kind of increased a sense of influence and kind of reinvigorated that notion. And then there's just that general sense of the pervasive relevance of the cultural exports of the US, with yesterday's Super Bowl as an excellent example of being sort of front page news everywhere, despite all the other things going on in the world. So a really strong sense of influence that America has over the rest of the world. And the next is the sense of innovation. Now, this isn't necessarily increasing or decreasing, but just kind of a really consistent sense of a fresh thinking nation with unrestrained ideation. There's sort of this cultural undercurrent of confidence to try, to fail fast, and to give things a go. That sort of just is baked into the DNA of American ethos. The next is a sense of division. Now, the previous work that was done in the last iteration of Market Pulse was happening during kind of around insurrection. And so since we've kind of moved away from that, there's a bit of a softened sense of internal division, but still a really strong notion that there's kind of two sides to this coin, and a really polarized sense of perspectives, which is about to be exacerbated by the fact that America is heading into another election year. And last but certainly not least is the sense of America's sort of eroding aspirational equity in the world as the US looks outward to other nations and sees weaknesses in key areas that America feels it should be really winning on, such as education, healthcare, and sustainability. So just a handful of weaknesses that gives this sense that America's kind of power and aspirational nature to the rest of the world is on the decline. Then we're moving on to China. So the first and foremost for China is this sense of success and real pride internally within China for what China is achieving, both within China and out within the rest of the world, and a real feeling in China that the nation is maturing, it's really coming into its own, and in a kind of sense that other nations don't really fully see that or understand it. So a misunderstood feeling within China that they see their success, but potentially other places in the world don't see it as quite as much. Related to this is a sense of relevance and really a feeling that when the world talks about superpowers, it's America and increasingly China. So a real sense that they're standing sort of shoulder to shoulder with the big influential nations in the world. And as a part of that, really pushing advances, really investing strongly in other nations and being a big part of global conversation. So a real sense of relevance for China in the international stage. The third is that they see themselves as very advanced, probably more so than the people who are looking into China might think that they are. Really fantastic sort of infrastructure, transport, the technology capability, access to all of that, healthcare, commerce, just a real sense of progress and things really ticking along, which, as mentioned there, might be a surprise to other places. So a real sense that they've got it figured out for their sort of middle class. But lastly, this sense of division is also apparent in China, and that's kind of where some of that class structure comes into play, of a sense of you've definitely got people accessing all of that advanced tech, but as you move outside of cities, there's somewhat less of that. So sort of economic disparity between cities and elsewhere, and also potentially just really the sense of not being super clear actually around how well China is doing on things like sustainability compared to other nations. A sense that, yes, it looks like China's doing a lot of great things, but internally the citizens in China see things that would suggest maybe that sentiment is not actually as powerful as it could be. So some division and questions over really sort of that success truly. Then when you look at the UK, and interestingly, this is going to be a really similar story for the UK as it is for the US. So the first is that sense of influence. The UK has historically been a place that's sort of a really important and influential nation in global conversations, sort of a hub of finance and culture. But there is a sense that that's decreasing and kind of waning as the years go on. So a sense of influence, but not as much as it once was. The next is a sense of creativity and kind of an acknowledgement of sort of the diverse and rich cultural and creative export that comes out of the UK. And so whilst that influence might be sort of waning, there's still so much happening, and the UK is very much a place that's still looked toward for creators, for tourism, for so much aspiration from other nations. So we really sense that that's still there. The next is division. Again, similar to the US, sort of a post-Brexit Britain looks very different than it did before, and there is absolutely this sense of kind of divisiveness within the nation, and a real split on opinions and positions that's then undermining the nation's ability to be influential and get ahead, which leads to this fourth idea of stagnation, which is kind of the division leads to neglect for key institutions, resulting in economic challenges and just really uncertainty around how the UK can navigate through important issues such as climate and sustainability, and I'm really feeling that there's not enough happening within the UK on these key topics. The next is Australia, so nice and close to home on this one. So the first is for Aussies, a sense of real stability, and this in part comes out of the fact that again, a couple of years ago, particularly just before COVID, there were wildfires happening, and then COVID hit, and there were a lot of things going on in Australia that felt really unstable. So coming into the end of 2023, seems to be a sense of life returning to normal, of more economic stability, at least a perception of climate stability for now, sort of on the other side of COVID. So yes, there's some cost of living pressures, but a general sense of return to normal from the past few years. The next is the sense of collaboration and kind of how Australia sees itself within the context of the rest of the world, which is that it acknowledges it's not necessarily as influential, not as close to other nations, so sort of not a world leader necessarily, but a nation with very powerful friends. So sort of they get influenced by proxy and see themselves as an important member of conversations as a result of who they ally with. The third is a sense of being lucky. So when you talk to Australians about themselves versus the rest of the world and kind of their role and place in all of that, they just acknowledge that they live in a beautiful place with a great lifestyle and sort of work-life balance. People are nice, education is good, and it's just a real sense of that they know they've got a good thing going compared to a lot of the rest of the world. But last and certainly not least is the sense of kind of lagging behind. Again, some of that, it's not necessarily stagnation, but almost actually just not keeping up on some key areas, particularly comparative to some of what's happening in New Zealand on issues like Indigenous rights, sustainability, kind of openness to other ways of living. So there's a definite sense of, when looking outward, Australians definitely acknowledge the fact that there's areas they could be doing better at. And last but not least, of the nations that we spoke of, we have Singapore. So the first thing that Singapore, in terms of how they see themselves, is it's just really a trusted place. It's kind of this really wonderful area and place where you can go and do business. They've got a really hot, stable economy. It's quite literally a safe place to be, and so it's a place where people can really flourish and do a lot. You can do business safely, and just a wonderful place to be a citizen and do business. The next is a sense of innovation, and this sentiment is very akin to New Zealand. For anyone who's ever seen research about New Zealand, the sense of forced ingenuity by way of sort of size and distance from other places, and limited resources. So sort of a nation of strivers, ingenuity born of those circumstances. So a real sense of that they can get on with what they've got. The third is a notion of kind of the connected hub for the East and the West of this place that is kind of the crossroads of the world. So a real place that people come to and through to get other places, making them this interesting nexus of finance and commerce, that's really unique to Singapore. And last is this sense of unsustainable. And this is kind of a double entendre here. So there's a notion of environmentally falling behind, so not being sustainable for the planet, and also an acknowledgement of their potentially unhealthy, sometimes work-life balance, which then makes people feel like, that's not a sustainable way to live. So a sense in looking outwards that, again, there's an opportunity here for Singapore to do better, particularly on sustainability. So that's just a quick summary of where nations see themselves. There's a lot to unpack there in addition to what we've got. So that's just a real overview. The next part that I'll talk us through is understanding leadership. And it's probably just worth pausing for a minute on why we're talking about leadership. So Lucy took us through before the global soft power kind of process and what that's all about. And so where leadership fits into this is that soft power is about influence and increasing New Zealand's soft power influence to the rest of the world. And in order to influence, what we've heard from consumers is that you need to lead. You need to be a leader in areas in order to be influential to the rest of the world. So that's where leadership ties into this story. And then in terms of leadership, we will focus on leadership in the key areas that are circled there in green, because that's where in the global soft power, New Zealand had weaknesses and potential to grow its soft power influence. So we'll specifically be talking about and thinking about leadership through the lenses of science, tech, innovation, and space. So that's what we'll see on the next few slides. So the first one is, what does leadership look like in the arena of science? And we really just posed that question to consumers pretty much as that. What do you think that means? What do you understand it to be? And honestly, it really comes down to the most fundamental expression of science that is relevant to their lives, since it's such a big area, which was about biology, medicine, and their own human body. So when you start thinking about examples of leadership in science, many people shortcut to the COVID vaccine in this sense of a healthcare breakthrough that supports society is leadership in the area of science. It also is about published research and international awards, but tends to come back to some applicability to their own lives and potentially their own selves through their health. The next is tech and innovation and what leadership looks like there. So similar thread here, you'll see as we go through, is that the most immediate comprehension around leadership in tech and innovation is goods and services in consumer lives. So they shortcut to companies like Tesla and Google and Uber and things that sort of simplify or sort of streamline everyday life and that they themselves can access. So leadership does look like tech embedded in consumers' everyday lives, strong military capability, and then things like groundbreaking ideas and tech within kind of embedded in society. The next is space exploration, and I will just preface that tying space to relevance to everyday life is really tricky for consumers. It's a pretty challenging topic to grasp and space and where that fits in and what leadership looks like. So people really default to a somewhat rudimentary comprehension of that, which is kind of understood at its basic level as involvement in space in some capacity. So it's about space stations, astronauts, rockets, satellites, any sort of information around being involved in the space race, if you will. So historical participation in the space race, nations which have always been associated with it, come through as leaders in space exploration. It could be presence on the International Space Station, landings and probes. So we hear a lot about NASA in this space because it's really the most immediate example of this activity. But this was a tricky one for people to grasp. And last but not least, we have sustainability. So what does leadership look like in sustainability? This one was, again, really interpreted as their relevance within their lives and more easily understood than the previous. But it's about what nations do to protect the planet within their own country and to a certain extent beyond that. So sort of top-down initiatives led by central governments. So they shortcut to things like strong public transport networks. Do you have EV infrastructure? Does your government have policies around in the environment and sustainability? So they can where they can see those things happening within society is where they can signify leadership by a nation on this topic. And so what we did throughout asking people, what does leadership look like on these topic areas, was also unpack with them what nations do you associate with being leaders in those areas. And more importantly, what's the common DNA? What are the common threads across all of those nations that allow them to be leaders? What does it mean? What does it take to be a leader in all of those areas? To try and unpack some codification of leadership. And we've landed on 5 indicators out of those conversations that nations can or should really be ticking the box on in order to be seen as a leader in any given arena, e.g. space, science, tech. It's important to note that in order to be a leader in these areas, a nation does not have to tick all 5 of these, but they do have to be present in some aspect of how they show up in order for leadership to be a reputable thing for this country. So we'll just unpack these a little bit further. So the first is this idea of power and might. So that would be the military, political, economic means to basically influence, which effectively kind of boils down to having hard power. So if you have hard power, there's a perception that you have influence and soft power. The next is the ability to drive the conversation. And this is about doing things first, sort of being the first mover, doing things in a new way. And that this comes typically, or is perceived to come, out of a strong national education credentials and a regulatory environment that encourages innovation. And what we mean by that, the easiest example is the US, where it's seen as a place where you can sort of fail without a lot of risk to that. So it's a sense of a place that allows people to try and fail fast. The third is the ability to transform daily life. So this is making things faster, better, and easier for everyday life. So the most immediate applicability to individual people's lives and things like that you can buy, like Apple Watches, iPhones, things like that. The next is that a nation works on humanity's behalf. So this is impacting life, but kind of at a humanity and all people level. So this would be sort of developing initiatives with a more humanitarian aim. And this feels like it springs from more collectivist cultures, often from smaller nations with strong educational credentials who tend to think of the greater good rather than the individual. And the last is the ability to sort of care for the planet. So sort of taking that sense of impact and kind of taking it up another level to the whole planet itself. So nations who are taking actions to preserve and protect the planet in some way that's meaningful are seen as leaders. And the ability to do this is perceived to come from smaller nations, again, that collectivism, and it's perceived to be as a result of having a stronger connection, proximity to nature, and sort of connection to the land itself. So those are the 5 indicators that we've landed on. And what we'll do now is really just talk you through how nations perceive how they themselves do on those 5 indicators. And as a result, what they want or need or are willing to look for in other nations in terms of filling those gaps. So just to set up how that works, basically how a nation perceives themselves doing on those metrics determines how they want to see other nations. So where a nation performs strongly on a leadership metric, they don't really see other nations as having a big role in that as well. Basically, they don't want competition. So you can partner with them, but they don't want to see you doing better than them because they perceive themselves as a leader in that area. But where a nation is perceived to not perform so well on a leadership indicator, there's a role for other nations to sort of credibly enhance and advance home nation progress. So that's really where there's an opportunity to come in and enhance their understanding of something or their capability in an area, and where other nations coming in and doing better is more welcomed. There is a lot on this slide. We're not going to present it all. It's really just a bit of a color visual to give you a sense on those 5 indicators down the left-hand side and the nations that we spoke with on the horizontal. And the color coding is green is good, yellow is average, red is not so good. And what that shows us at a glance is that generally speaking, our last two leadership metrics of on humanity's behalf and caretaking planet Earth is where there is the most consistent weakness across the nations that we spoke with. And so what that tells us at a glance is that those are the two leadership metrics where most nations feel behind the curve, and where there's the most opportunity for another nation to come in and enhance. And just as a reminder, on humanity's behalf was doing things for the greater good of all humanity, and caretaking planet Earth, pretty obvious name of looking after the planet. So it reflects that home nation sentiment that we heard before, which is that there seem to be some real gaps and flaws in terms of home nation perceptions, particularly on the areas of sustainability. So that comes through really strongly here as well. So just keep that in mind as we go through the next few sections, that those are the areas where other nations are most amenable to other countries coming in and being a leader. Worth noting, though, just a bit of a caveat on all of that, how they see themselves perform also impacts their sort of amenability overall. So it's kind of obvious because we've sort of just talked about that, but it's just worth noting that, for example, the US and China see themselves as quite sort of eminent leaders on many of these topics. So there will be sort of less amenability to other nations coming in and trying to lead, irrespective of how those nations actually perform. Whereas as we go down the countries and we get to Australia and Singapore, there's a much stronger acknowledgement of the fact that they have less strengths and more openness to partners, which is really just what we sum up here as a final slide for me, which is that for the US and China, they can have a bit of a defensive mindset. So other nations competing could be viewed cynically. So care is needed when trying to demonstrate leadership in the US and China. In terms of the UK, whilst there has historically been leadership perception there as a nation as a whole, there's definitely an openness and a sense of collaboration that they acknowledge they need now based on filling some of those weaknesses. And lastly, for Australia and Singapore, partnering with other nations is pretty crucial to progress and success. So there's a lot of openness to the role that other nations can play on these leadership metrics in those countries. And that's going to be it from me.
Thank you, Kim. So that's obviously a really great backdrop to how people interpret leadership and how these nations are seeing themselves. And obviously that provides a lens as to how they view other nations as well, and what the roles can be. So I'm going to focus now on New Zealand and how we're perceived. I'm going to start with some very, I suppose, probably unsurprising comments around what people assume and associate with New Zealand today, which is a bit of an overview. I might just put them all up on screen here straight away. We've got these colourful words at the top here. So the consistent themes that we heard around New Zealand, what the associations are these ones at the top here. So small and remote, local, small population comparatively. We're pretty isolated from much of the world. We have bountiful natural beauty, and well known for our beautiful environments, natural kind of beautiful flora and fauna that we take care of. It's obviously a real draw card for us as a nation. We're seen as being progressive and unproblematic. So that's been played back to us as being seen in our politics in recent years, most notably with the COVID response, the response to the terrorist attack in Christchurch, but also reflecting that we've got positive relationships with Maori and Indigenous relationships, which were noted particularly in the US and Australia as being lacking in those nations, and recognised as something more positive here. We're also seen as laid back people, relaxed, friendly, and passionate about those outdoors that we mentioned, and also agrarian. It's a very kind of key part of our country, our economy, and we are felt to be a little bit more of a rural country than urban. So probably not a big surprise. I guess you could have probably intuited some of those things yourself, I'm sure. What's important, I suppose, is what lies below those. So the implications that flow on from there they start to demonstrate the platform that we can build upon, but also the gap that we need to bridge in telling credible stories that are believable for people. So just to highlight some of the consistent implications there, I suppose being small and remote seems to suggest to people that we're maybe self-sufficient, we're decisive and community-oriented. Our relationship with the natural world that we've got, there's an assumption that we're outdoorsy, we love to live in it and therefore look after it. And there is a presumption then that we must have some strong sustainability policy or credentials, or at least worldview, in terms of looking after that world. It suggests that we're collectivist. Our response to COVID and that sort of thing, and Christchurch, reflect the fact that we're probably a collectivist culture, and we prioritize the group and the greater good over the individual. And we're laid back, open and accommodating, we're friendly, we've got a great work-life balances, and we're honest and straightforward. What it does come with is a little bit of a shadow, though. So those words down the bottom. So there are a bit of a few challenges there that we do need to bridge. So things like that result of our distance and our small influence on the world stage in terms of politics and our might, as Kim said, talked about earlier, suggests we might be a bit disconnected. We may have low influence, and there may be low opportunities here. We'd even go as far as some people saying that we may be not a very modern country and not very tech capable. So there is a little bit of a challenge there in terms of how we're perceived and what we're capable of doing and delivering. And our laid back demeanor can even suggest that we have low aspirations. We're not really striving to lead in any particular realm. So there's a bit of a challenge there, but a great platform to build upon. Clarity is needed as to what our global position is, however. So it's particularly in these worlds of science, tech, sustainability, space exploration, there's not a strong clarity in terms of our leadership and what's our goal in that regard there. In the US, UK, and Australia, the perceptions of us as a nation are really anchored in tourism and the stereotypes of what we are and what our lifestyle is like. A little bit of a perception there that we're sort of Australia-like. Great place to visit, nice place for a gap year, or perhaps to move for a quality of life, but not really leading in these realms. In the Asian markets, there are some positive perceptions around our educational institutes and our credentials there. But again, that's where the idea of us not really striving to lead anywhere, having that lovely laid-back attitude toward life can be a bit of an undoing there and highlights a question mark over how driven we are to lead in these arenas. So coming back to these key leadership indicators that Kim talked you through, probably not a surprise then in terms of how we perform on some of these, particularly power and might. Obviously, we're not comparing with many nations in terms of scale of population, economy, and so on. So power and might, not really something that we can build upon. Driving the conversation, as I said, the sense that we have a lovely lifestyle here, but we're perhaps lacking in drive. It shows that we're not really seen to be doing that today. We may be, but people aren't seeing the evidence of that thus far. And similarly with transforming daily life, people aren't really associating us with these industries and therefore impacting people's daily lives on a global scale and in a meaningful way that people recognize. The last two, however, on humanity's behalf and caretaking planet Earth, is where things really start to click into place for people with regards to New Zealand. So the fact that we are seen as collectivists, having quite progressive attitudes, and we act on the greater good, and that's been proven in recent events and seen in the news cycle across the world, really starts to make sense for people and feel credible. And similarly with the caretaking planet Earth, that sense that we have that connection to our landscape and we really prioritize it and value it, suggests that we have some priority on sustainability as well. So where that leaves us is with a really nice picture in people's minds of who New Zealanders are and what their values are, which is that blue stuff on the top left there, the left-hand side of this chart here. So it really comes away with, we come away from these conversations with people thinking that we are compassionate, we have some humanity, we're collectivist, progressive, pragmatic, open-minded, we're creative and fun, and we're friendly and kind. Lovely values that were felt to be kind of lacking in the world really today. So quite unique for New Zealand. We didn't set out to explore those. These are what emerged from the conversations, and they align really beautifully with the values that Ender's story tries to live by. So those being manaki, so our warmth, care, respect, and generosity. Putikitanga, curiosity, ingenious, our adventurous spirit. Pono, our integrity and honesty. And Tiaki, our care for people, place, and planets as well. So they align beautifully. And what we've got on the right-hand side of the chart is why we're able to do great things with these. Those associations that people have about the nation that showcase that people presume that we should be able to do some great things with these values. We should apply them to some great initiatives. They see us as having a strong, stable economy, a free market that encourages investment, innovation, and success. We're known to have respected education institutes, universities, research institutes, that sort of thing. We're known as a wealthy nation with a high quality of life and a diverse population, immigration that brings and fosters new ideas and perspectives on things. So in theory, we should be producing great things if we clash these two things together. But evidence feels like it's absent. So people are not sure what we're really doing with this. They're not seeing, I suppose, the outcome of these values and these facilitators of what we might do with those values. Now, I mentioned at the start that we showed some stimulus, some examples. A lot of those were New Zealand initiatives, and the response to these when we revealed that these are all New Zealand initiatives, these are things that are done by New Zealand businesses or research institutions, was really widespread surprise across all those groups, really positive response. But really, a sense of, wow, why are we not hearing about this? This is much more than I would have expected from New Zealand. You're a tiny little country on the end of the earth. I have no idea you're doing all of this stuff. So there's a real opportunity to tell these stories. We have the evidence that we can start to champion here to change these narratives. Two areas of particular surprise. One is that we have a well-developed space sector, really associated with the superpowers of the world, US, China, Russia, those kind of countries. So the fact that we're actually a significant player there, launching many, many rockets, private space industry, and everything else with it, is really quite surprising for people and starts to make people reflect differently about the nation and how they think of us. And then the second is our ambitious, I suppose, big swings when it comes to tackling emissions. Obviously, it's a big challenge of our time. It's an area that, as Kim mentioned, is felt to be really lacking, and perhaps some of these home nations not doing as much as some of the people we spoke with would like them to be doing. So it's really, it was really impressive to see some notable innovations there coming out of New Zealand. So these have the potential to really drive some of these indicators. So that space exploration piece, as I mentioned, it's seen as the domain of superpowers, successful economies that have the money, they have the freedom, they have the ability to prioritize such things, suggest that we're a nation with some power. So telling those stories can help move the dial on that. Sustainability, a really great platform for us to start driving the conversation there. As I said, it's an arena that people are felt to be wishing they'd see more from other nations. And to be able to do that and put some evidence on the table that we're really pursuing that, taking it seriously, is a great place for us to start driving that conversation. There are initiatives about healthcare that we could talk, that might start to talk about transforming daily life. And then collectively, stories around sustainability and innovation to tackle that and tackle those challenges really ladder back to those indicators around doing things on humanity's behalf and caretaking planet Earth. So really that story about sustainability being a big part of the why we're doing these things, why we're choosing these issues and initiatives to invest in terms of our time and our money to make a difference on. So landing all that in a story for New Zealand. If we try and bring it all together, Kim's mentioned where these worlds interact with consumers in a way that is meaningful for them. So in science, you know, there's a broad church in science. There's a lot of things being explored that not everyone is really aware of. So it really comes back to where that impacts people's daily lives. So it's things like having countries that have advanced healthcare infrastructure, universities and institutes that are doing research and publishing breakthroughs, that sort of thing, and awards being handed out. That's where people see nations leading in the world of science. In consumer technology, in technology and innovation, sorry, it's around consumer tech. It's nations that seem to build that into everyday life or foster the innovations that can kind of go out there to the world, the Apples of the world, the Teslas and that sort of thing, and change people's everyday lives. Space exploration, as I said, really it's about the long history of playing in that race. People talk about going back to the space race in last century and those established space agencies and the big apps landing on the moon and Mars, sending things to Mars and that sort of thing, but also having that private industry and billionaires, the sort of billionaires playground that it's kind of becoming today as well. And then sustainability, it's about demonstrating that we've got I suppose a culture of care in politics and a collectivist outlook on life that fosters that. So investment in things like even as simple as public transport networks that encourage that over, say, car use, investment in new technologies such as EV adoption and infrastructure, and energy generation that's cleaner and greener as well. And that's also reflected in nations that look after their land and have those pristine lands. So we can see some alignment there with New Zealand. And just coming back to these, Kim mentioned some of these earlier. There are certain traits of these nations that deliver these kind of indicators here. So you have power and might. It's driven by large populations and economies and so on. Driving the conversation, transforming daily life tends to be capitalist, individualist culture that drive that kind of success. However, on humanity's behalf and caretaking planet Earth is usually seen from smaller nations, and people play back, well, it's smaller nations, it's Northern European nations, it's Scandinavian nations that have this collectivist mindset. They may be smaller and they look after their own as a unit. And New Zealand absolutely fits into that bucket there. So we really aligned with that, and we have some great traits that we can build upon there to really kind of drive those indicators of our leadership. And we have this lovely narrative around our values, excuse me, and how we're seen, that builds a narrative that we can talk about and build upon. So there's a belief that we're collectivist, and we have politics that reflects that, and that's been proven and demonstrated over the recent years. There's a belief that we're well connected to and protective of our natural environments, our wildlife, and so on. And then there's that belief that we're comparatively positive in terms of our relationship with Indigenous folk, with Māori, that's recognised across the world. So demonstrating our leadership requires three things. One is a cohesive and authentic overarching story. So that's consistently showing that we focus on issues that make sense for us, that are true to our values. That needs to be empowered by credible traits of New Zealand and our strong capabilities. So demonstrating that we invest our capabilities in things that are credible for us, and then told through compelling, relevant evidence of our ingenuity. So that might be our communications, the stories we tell that are meaningful to both our issues and meaningful to the people we're telling those stories to. So what does that look like? Credibility, firstly, so in terms of talking about an authentic narrative, it's pretty clear that there's a gap in terms of where our home nations that we've been speaking with are lacking, and they're looking for more action and leadership on. And there are indicators where we're seen as being credible and actually having a story to tell. There's a gap that we can fulfill and we can kind of take the reins on, which is that there's action on humanity's behalf and caretaking planet Earth. That doesn't mean we can't deliver to driving the conversation and transforming daily life. Excuse me. In doing so, in driving that sustainability story, we can play back to those, and we can steadily build those indicators as well, and they will follow as a result. But the key focus in terms of an authentic narrative to us is really on that right-hand side of the chart there. We've got some lovely values that are really quite clearly formed in people's minds, all those lovely things that we heard played back: progressive, collectivist, open-minded, and so on. They're well formed in the minds of people today. So we've got a great platform to build on, and it's very, very credible, therefore, to apply those values to initiatives, to challenges, to problems that the world is facing in a way that feels credible for New Zealand to pursue. And people intuit these things about us already, and they want to see more about us. So they're informed by those values, and they expect that we apply those values to the initiatives that we're going to invest in. Excuse me. However, as I said, we're lacking a bit of evidence to show what we do with those values and how we apply our wealth of resources really to the issues that people feel that should be concerning for New Zealanders. So what does that story look like? In terms of telling a credible story, we need several components. We need to tell people who New Zealanders are, which I've mentioned. We need to show what we do, and we need to show how we can do it as well to really illustrate what we're applying to these initiatives and how we're enabling our leadership. So what does that look like? Who New Zealanders are shouldn't be a surprise now to you guys. So we're a progressive collectivist nation. We're pragmatic and ingenious problem solvers. We're open-minded and creative, and we're connected and understanding and respecting of our land. So what we do then, we focus on arenas that have a natural link to perceptions of our nation. So issues of sustainability, reducing our impact on the planet, and with larger kind of human, bigger than us benefits in mind. We're not just doing it for us in New Zealand, we're doing it for everyone and the collective. And how we're able to do that then? Well, we have all these lovely infrastructures. We have leadership and infrastructures that support that progress, that innovation. We have world-class education and research, and we're an advanced nation that we can choose to prioritize these things. We can prioritize things like sustainability because of the position that we're in as a wealthy nation. And we're diverse and we're collaborative. We have lots of different ideas and perspectives that we're open-minded to. So what does that look like? I suppose our leadership looks like New Zealand's ingenuity is the application of resources and capabilities in science, technology, and innovation underpinned by sustainability to challenges that reflect New Zealanders' worldviews and values. And that really comes back to I suppose New Zealand's national proposition, care for people and connection to place drives our ingenuity. It fits beautifully, and it really proves that that is true. We didn't go in to this research trying to prove or disprove that and test whether that was right, but it's a natural kind of fallout from the implications and the understanding that people have of New Zealand and what we're all about. We know these are really important traits to pursue. The Global Power Soft research has shown how valuable these arenas are to build upon, and we have a great foundation of perceptions that people have of us, and it's built on tourism work and the experience that you guys around the world are putting forward around New Zealand and what New Zealanders are all about. But we really just need to start telling that story and building upon that to tell our ingenuity story in the realms of science, technology, and sustainability. The last couple of slides from me before we open it to Q&A. There's a few rules, I suppose, a few principles that we identified for telling stories that connect with people. There was a lot of, as Kim mentioned, stories that were a little bit hard for people to grasp the meaning of. So the first thing is that we have to make stories relatable. We have to really connect stories with everyday people. So talking about some space innovation is great. It's all very exciting. It's all very impressive. But doing it just because we can is hard for people to really relate to. So we really need to demonstrate, well, what's the meaning of that? What's the why behind why we're doing that? How's that going to improve things for people? We need to show the impact as well. So we need to draw the line for people between what we're doing and what the impact will be. Is that going to unlock something that's going to improve people's lives? Is that going to open a cascade of new improvements and benefit for the greater good, for people, for planet, whatever that might be? So we really need to demonstrate the impact. And they need to be tangible stories as well. They can't just be things that we're thinking about, we're researching, but so is everybody else in the world. They're things that we can really show that we're putting our money and our resources behind to really prioritize and take action on, not just kind of in theory and not sort of pie in the sky thinking, but actually applying real resources to taking seriously and things that we can therefore own the conversation around. So just to sum it up, I suppose on one last page, I suppose we've got a great story here that we can build. We've got a cohesive, overarching story that people really believe is credible for New Zealand, that our ingenuity helps people around the world and our planet. We can do this credibly in a way that really plays to our strengths. We're collaborative, we're seen as honest, we're easy to do business with, and all those other positive attributes that people have about us as New Zealanders, and we're supported by lots of great stories. We've got lots of resources, capabilities around tech, innovation, and science that we can apply these values to. We just need to start telling that story. So that's it from me. I will pass over to David now, I think. So
you will indeed. Hey, great job. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Kim, for fantastic presentation and lots to unpack. We're getting into the Q&A in a second, so please feel free to put your comments or your questions into the chat on whatever platform you're using. I guess just a couple of points to round out the discussion before we do get into the Q&A is, first of all, increasing international influence is a really key part of how we grow the value of New Zealand, how we grow the organizations, the companies, the businesses, and what we're seeing through this research is some really tangible ways that we can do that. There are things that we have that appeal to other countries that will grow their perceptions of New Zealand. And as I said earlier, growth in perception leads to a growth in willingness to pay. So let's not put the questions up just yet, if that's okay. I will come to those in a second. Instead, I just wanted to talk about that linkage between the work that you do as businesses to showcase your products and services and the global impact that might have. Now, time for a bit of a Q&A process. I'm actually going to bring up the questions one at a time, and maybe we can get us all back up on the screen as well. And we'll talk about a little bit about the work that have been done through the research, but I noticed some of the comments are a bit more broad about New Zealand Stories work as well. So I'll cover those off. But firstly, on a couple of tactical points, will there be a PowerPoint or a PDF that you can have access to? Yes, is the answer to that. If you look at our New Zealand Story website, I think, Lucy, as of today, pretty much, isn't it? Is it up today?
Yep, straight away after this webinar. Yes.
Straight away after this, and we'll have some some of that to be able to download and etc. So absolutely correct. Now, some questions a little bit about the process or maybe methodology type question this is for Kim or Nick. The question is would there be a benefit perhaps to looking at the views of the overseas people who live in New Zealand, who therefore know us much more intimately, to contrast with that in-market work? Is that the sort of thing you've ever seen before?
I can jump in on this one. So yes, I mean, there's absolutely benefit to speaking with people in New Zealand as well, though what I would say is those who have already chosen to invest their time, energy, move to New Zealand, have managed to grasp an element of the New Zealand brand story that those in other countries have not. So the focus of this work was really understanding for those who haven't yet been to New Zealand or are not as closely related, is how we increase New Zealand's relevance and influence in those people's lives. So the frame here was about people who haven't quite maybe made that leap yet, to potentially influence them to do so in the future.
Great.
I think that just to build on that, I think their perceptions will probably reflect maybe some realities that weren't mentioned in this, things that aren't necessarily recognised. The slides Kim talked about, the home nation sentiments, at the start of the session today, reflect some of those in their own nation. There's a lot of great things going on here, but there are also some realities that we recognize living in this nation. So I imagine we would hear something similar, maybe some realities that we didn't quite hear when speaking to people who haven't visited New Zealand.
Can I just also add to that there are a lot more people out there in the rest of the world than there are here in New Zealand. So, we're trying to influence from New Zealand, others to buy New Zealand goods and services, to, come to visit, to educate here, to immigrate here, and to buy New Zealand products wherever they might be in the world. So the population size, if you like, that's out there, we've got a lot more to influence. As Kim said, those who are already here know New Zealand well. So in fact, in this research, we deliberately spoke to people who had some knowledge of New Zealand but hadn't actually been here before. So
good stuff. I just want to pick up one comment that one of the people was making in terms of this research. I'll pop it up, but it's quite wordy. But the comment is, does this sort of research or this discussion today imply that we're walking away from our core? Absolutely not, is the answer to the question. First, for two reasons. One is technology and food and fibre go together absolutely. There's a huge program of work around technology in the food sector. I was quite intimately involved personally in that one, in agri-tech. And secondly, while we're talking today about this, exploring this area of science, technology, education, etc., that underpins a much broader story of New Zealand, or stories of New Zealand, that we know and continue to work on. So what we were specifically looking at for this research was understanding areas, new areas of interest that we think are that consumers around the world are wanting to look into. Lucy, did you want to add to that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The technology that we have underpins who we are. But I guess what we saw through this research is that consumers that we spoke to in these key markets, the message is not getting through strongly enough, and so we have to invest and focus more on doing that, so that people do understand that there is more to New Zealand than the current perceptions that they have. There is a real gap, and we know that, as Josh said, when we showed some of the examples of the work that comes out of New Zealand, people are literally gobsmacked. Like they've kind of got the stunned silence where they go, "Wow, I had no idea that New Zealand is doing this great stuff." So, we've got some really great examples. It's just that we need to basically focus on getting those stories out there and demonstrating how clever we are and what we're doing, and most importantly, why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And David, I just have one small build on that, which is just to say that really stories born of those already embedded associations about New Zealand, overlaid with tech capability and the sustainability story, are actually the most powerful and credible stories to talk about for New Zealand. So in a way, we're actually saying take what's already really equitable for New Zealand and use that as the foundation of how to build those stories about New Zealand's technological capabilities to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
it's a really good point. We talk about that all the time, but part of what we do at New Zealand Story is take what people already know about us, extend into the areas that is starting to be curious, and then right out to the things that they don't know about us. And today we're sort of in those last couple of realms, but absolutely correct. But on the point of technology specifically, the question is, nice and specific. Which of the markets reviewed are you most open to that tech story? We're talking about tech in particular. And it feels like, that's boiling a very large question down into a very simple one, but any real reactions to that?
It is. I mean, my sense from the work we've done is that Australia, obviously close neighbours, know a lot about us and already have a pretty established relationship with us. We're probably the most open. I think the UK was pretty open too, in terms of being open to what we've got. Certainly, there were conversations we had around, we already looked to New Zealand for models that they use in healthcare and things like that. That's not tech, but there is an already, an acknowledgement that we've got some nice thinking here that can be applied to industries over there. So I would imagine the UK as well. Comes back to that chart I think that Kim showed toward the end of her section around nations. I suppose degree of openness and the challenge to those conversations. If you speak to the US and China, where there's a sense of dominance and exceptionalism, and we're already leaders in this, aren't we? There's a more cynical view, but I think Australia and the UK in particular was probably most open, I would say.
While we're here, a quick advertisement. If you're thinking about technology as a story, and again, it's a subset of a bigger thing, but the See Tomorrow First campaign, which is a piece of work around the New Zealand technology sector, at the website that's shown in the comments at the bottom, seetomorrowfirst.nz, that has a whole lot of content and things that we are promoting internationally, us, New Zealand Technology Association, NZTE, etc. So you can get a lot of content there and see how we're showing up in the rest of the world. Interestingly, and on that point, actually, people are really piling in a few things. We've got some great knowledge and evidence of climate science and tech. We've got plenty of stories and personality to drive storytelling. We're a gateway to the Antarctic. There's obviously a lot going on. It goes back to that point I think Lucy made about, when we start to actually describe the things that are going on in New Zealand, people get really surprised. How do we connect is the question from Lizzie. I'd suggest that, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, Callaghan Innovation are both two amazing government organisations we work with closely, who have customer-facing teams that connect on exactly these sorts of points. And of course, we at New Zealand Story are always looking for new, interesting, innovative things that we can tell the world about us as well. So don't be shy about getting in touch with us. Right, I'm just looking for some other key questions up here. Building on this, I guess someone's asking, what is New Zealand Story preparing for a content asset and storytelling point of view in the space industry? Getting very specific. But I guess maybe, Lucy, do you want to touch on how this research sort of informs, how we're starting to use it to inform some of where we spend our time?
Yeah, I mean, this research is fresh from being in field. So we completed it just at the back end of last year. So the next stage is really taking these insights and then understanding, how it all fits together across other New Zealand government agencies. So we need to basically get together and see how we work across industries, how we work with Education New Zealand, how we work with the space sector in New Zealand to tell those stories and how we're going to promote that. So that's our next step. We haven't got all the answers just yet as about how we're going to do it, but that's kind of where we go from here. And that's part of, sharing this research, fresh to kind of go, this is what we've seen so far. This is where we're heading in terms of what we need to do. And so that will be our focus. So that's our next stage, is to basically pull this together and how we're doing it. And I'll kind of reinforce that, we know that we've got the stories. It's basically going how we do this and how do we connect it to what we're known for already in New Zealand so that it has impact, and so that we also get these stories out in the right channels so that we do get, eyeballs and reach and engagement and drive conversations, because that's also how we will change perceptions. It's all about how do we get media pick up, how do we get people reading this in a credible way so that they know about it, know about what we can do in New Zealand, because that's how we get the message out there. So
one of the people here has an idea on that. I presume that's David from Brandkit, and I think he means Neom City, the project in Saudi Arabia. I don't think we're going to be able to do a Neom City style project to elevate our perceptions, but it's a cool idea. Maybe you could lobby our ministers for more budget for us to do that sort of thing. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I just want to acknowledge there's a bunch of questions here that relate to sort of, and they're not so much about the research, but they're about New Zealand's kind of research settings and how our ingenuity message may or may not show up. Just as an example, someone's here's asking, well, this is all well and good. We're telling a great story about New Zealand's innovation, but actually we've got one of the lowest research spends in the OECD. Trust me, I know about that. I've written many books about it. Our challenges as a country in terms of how we focus on research and development is certainly something that, you know, we across the government system know. Callaghan Innovation, you know, as a government partner is certainly very focused on that. But despite that, we see these incredible stories. You know, despite that, we see the space sector being the 4th most prolific in the world. We see our sustainability story really resonating. And I guess that's what we're trying to show today is that we've got a great story to tell. We've got many great stories to tell, and therefore we can lead out with some of those things now. And in fact, the world's very curious about them as well. So yeah, lots of good things going on. I want to someone's asking how they can get in touch with us or what's our website. There you go, newzealandstory.govt.nz. Given we're pretty much out of time, Joshua or Kim or Lucy, do you want to make any final comments before we wrap it up?
No, just thanks for
just thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for everybody who's attended. We really enjoyed working on this project, and it's been a pleasure to present these results to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us. Thanks for sticking around to hear what we had to say. Thank you.
Very good. And we will, as we've mentioned a couple of times, this is all available on our website right now. So there's the website down the bottom of the screen. You can download the pack. You'll see there's recording of this session, obviously. You know, we're always learning from doing things like this. Hopefully this technology worked pretty well for us. There's obviously some people who got some good things out of it. So really keen to do more. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia pai tō rā.